Hello everybody, I hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video, which I'm going to begin with an apology in advance. You see, a few weeks ago I published this video, which was addressing claims that's made by numerous flat earthers, but in particular it's a claim made by Nathan Oakley saying that the Earth gets measured flat. Now, the basis for this claim generally centers around the idea that measurements require the Earth to be flat, such as them saying that you can't get elevation angles from a curved surface, so therefore the fact that we get elevation angles to stars for celestial navigation must therefore mean the Earth is flat, or that distances like miles and kilometers are linear, not curved distances, so therefore the fact that we can measure distances between locations on Earth means the Earth must be flat rather than curved. So the video I did was tackling those claims and showing everyday examples where we use angles to and from curved surfaces to show it is absolutely possible to achieve it with tangents, and that we can measure distances over curved surfaces, like distances over a hill, or the fact that we can measure the circumference of a ball. Now, there were quite a few people who commented on that video of mine, though, saying they just had to turn it off and could not stand watching it because they just couldn't bear to listen to the clips of Nathan anymore due to his tone and his attitude. Well, Nathan did a live stream response to my video, which wound up being about 3.5 hours long, in which he seems to have a bit of a meltdown and throw a tantrum whilst still trying to assert that the Earth is measured flat. However, there were a few key areas that he and his panel talked about and have continued to bring up in subsequent streams that I really wanted to cover. One is NTSB flight data and how they think pilots fly planes, which I'm going to cover in a separate video. And this one will be covering basically elevation angles and celestial navigation not requiring a flat Earth, and Nathan unwittingly acknowledging that the Earth isn't actually measured flat. So I need to apologise in advance, especially to my regular viewers who couldn't make it through that last video of mine, because the subsequent videos will also include some clips of him. However, I promise I will do my best to try and keep them to a minimum. They are, however, somewhat necessary because you really need to hear the claims straight from the horse's mouth rather than just taking my word that that is what is being claimed, because obviously I don't want to strawman the arguments. And I'm going to start with the worst bit of his stream so we can get that out the way. Because, as I just mentioned, his response seemed to throw somewhat of a tantrum and have a meltdown. And so here is warning to you: if you want to skip this bit, pause the video now and jump to this timestamp. But just to prove I'm not making it up about the tantrum...
I mean, I understand having been dropped on your head, this might be difficult to comprehend, Dave. You stroke your dog and let him lick you.
Because both instances, you're just taking angles between tangent lines.
Right, Dave, you look like Gollum. I assume you are fundamentally unfuckable based on your appearance, because this is what you're spending your time doing. Right? You sound like a retard, you look like Gollum, you're fundamentally unfuckable, and this is what you're spending your time doing.
In fact, I think he totaled 16 times throughout that stream that he called me such a troll, even bringing his wife and kids onto camera and gloating that I will never have such things in life.
Let's just show Dave McKeegan something he'll never experience. This is what me and my wife made, Dave. Yeah? This is something you'll never get. Yeah? The love of a small child. I don't beat these children. Yeah? I just want to make that clear. I want to make that absolutely clear. I'm sure Dave would prefer that I didn't point out he's an unfuckable troll, that no woman will ever love him because of his face and how ugly he is, how natural selection's a bitch for Dave, and he'll only ever receive the love of that dog. Yeah? He's not going to produce children.
Now, anybody that watched my video will have probably noticed the distinct lack of personal attacks that I aimed at Nathan. In fact, I don't recall ever mentioning his wife or kids in any of the videos that I've done about him. The video that I did was only talking about how we can get measurements, and yet Nathan, for some reason, felt the need to launch into a tyrant of abuse towards me and how I'm seemingly going to die alone and unloved.
Which is used to establish horizontal between them 2 points on the one horizontal plane, not 2 tangent lines touching a sphere that you haven't got.
Dave, why don't you go out and find a woman? Somewhere out there's an ugly woman who'll sleep with you. You don't have to spend your time telling the world that they measure to a ball you've imagined, that I can pick apart as being a ball that's been created with flat Earth elevation angle measurements to Polaris, or dip angle measurements from a surface level with parallel eye level in the case of Al-Biruni. This is sad.
He's got his dog.
It's just sad. Go and find a woman, Dave. Now, I realise it's hard because you look like you look. Yeah? You are fundamentally unfuckable.
Which did seem a bit hypocritical, given that only 2 days prior, he was streaming about how people are always making personal attacks about him rather than addressing his arguments about measurements.
We still measure Earth flat, regardless of the personal attacks I seem to be gaining at the moment. Yeah? There's a saying, when you're over the target, you catch a lot of flack. Now again, I'll point out that what I'm getting is personal attacks and character assassination in rebuttal to me pointing out how you, ball-believing idiots, require Earth to be measured flat. But understand and appreciate that no amount of personal attacks is going to change the awful truth of how we measure Earth. Now keep it up. I mean, what is it that you want to achieve exactly by laying out personal attacks in response? It is a personal attack, an ad hom. It's a rebuttal-less reply. It doesn't address the argument.
I mean, it is saying something when even his own panel members were trying to bring him back onto topic.
This is why you repel women, Dave. That and you look like this, with your Antarctica t-shirt on. Yeah? Now me, even when I'm fat, I'll be honest, I still have women approaching me, even with a ring on. Maybe it's the ring, I don't know. But even looking quite gross, stressed out, spotty and fat, I can still attract women. My wife still finds me attractive. Yeah.
Why are you going there, Nathan?
Why?
Listen,
Why? Because.
Given that I'd said nothing personal about him or his family, I just thought it was unnecessary. And given that he was complaining only a few days beforehand that people keep making it personal rather than addressing his topic of measurements, for him to then respond to a video that is only talking about his claims of measurements, and for him to make it all personal, I thought was very hypocritical. My wife, by comparison, thought it was bloody hilarious. I couldn't tell you what our kids thought of it though, because obviously I've never mentioned it to them. But personal attacks aside, I was pleasantly surprised by Nathan's stream because he managed to watch a good deal of my video, which I didn't think he would. Given that my video was more than 40 minutes long, Nathan usually only streams for about an hour or so, and he tends to operate a rule of about 10-1, where for every 1 word that he lets play from a video, he will then spend 10 more words in response to remind his audience that he thinks the Earth gets measured flat, and as such, he doesn't usually get through much of a video that he's reviewing. For example, he constantly claims that we measured the Earth flat while we were in Antarctica, and a few weeks back he reviewed the video that Will Duffy put out on the Final Experiment channel all about the measurements that we took in Antarctica, which was a 45-minute long video. He spent an hour and a half reviewing it, during which time pretty much nobody apart from Nathan spoke a word, and yet he only managed to cover the first 12 minutes because he kept pausing to try and assert that we measure the Earth flat, and wasn't even able to get to the part of the video where Will actually talks about how we measure the distances between lines of meridian, not only at 80 degrees south in Antarctica, but at 53 degrees south in Punta Arenas, and showing that the distance between the meridians increases as you move towards the equator, and that I personally measured the distance also at 53 degrees north here in the UK, and the distances between the meridians here is equal to those in Punta Arenas, just like you'd see on a globe. So the actual measurements we took of Earth did not measure flat, But Nathan didn't get that far into the video, so I wasn't expecting him to get very far into my video either. But as it happens, he wound up streaming for far longer than usual to respond to it, and wound up covering almost all of it. He stopped with only about 5 minutes remaining, which was somewhat frustrating though, because he stopped right before I got on to talking about surveyors. And here is where I will say Nathan has unwittingly shot himself in the foot, because he constantly claims that we've measured the Earth flat with elevation angles and that they've measured the Earth flat as well, even though Nathan admits he's never actually taken an elevation angle measurement in his life.
Flat Earth elevation angle measurement to a star. From a navigation manual. I didn't make this. I haven't measured one either.
But like I pointed out in my last video, just after Nathan cut it off, and yet the very people whose job it actually is to go out and measure the Earth, i.e. surveyors, measure the Earth as a globe. It's surveyors who go out and create surveys that are then used in construction projects and map making and so on. And if the surveys were wrong, day-to-day life as we know it would hit the fan. And at least Nathan actually acknowledges that it is surveyors who are the ones actually measuring the Earth, except he asserts they measure it flat.
We're not talking about Jaron with his bits of cardboard. We're talking about surveyors. People who learn how to do their trade in university and then go and build things. Dan hasn't gone out and measured 50k flat. He's affirming that's factually how it's done, because it is. But the surveyors survey Earth flat.
And even goes so far as to say that you can survey the height of a mountain using trig.
Again, him going up a mountain that he measures off a flat Earth with trig to say how high the horizon, like the one you showed with your little ball, is derived from a parallel eye level and surface level with dip angle measurements. That requires surface level. It requires you measure the height of a mountain with trig. Yeah?
Now that one amuses me because he's saying you can accurately calculate the height of a mountain using trig, but ask him to calculate the height of the sun or the moon using trig and he'll say it can't be done.
Is how close is the sun and how does it operate on a flat Earth?
Okay, so you can't acquire that information because if you're using the sun to navigate with, as it moves towards the horizon, if you're measuring an angle and then calculating the distance to the GP beyond the horizon that isn't Earth curve that we've debunked, then that would infer, if you're using the triangle to get the height, that it's moving lower to the ground as it reaches the horizon. Well, obviously that's not the case. The sun isn't getting closer to the ground. You can derive its GP position to navigate with it, but it's not getting closer to the ground, so we don't have a height claim. I don't make a height claim.
A problem which I highlighted to them a few years ago, but they seemingly missed the point. I did a video showing how you can easily do trig to figure out height if you have a flat baseline. But without a flat baseline, it's far more complicated. For example, if you can see the base of a building and you know the distance you are away from it, then you can measure its angular size and you can calculate its height. But if the bottom portion of the building is obscured, then obviously you can't. Just like the example that's on screen here, which is actually an example that Nathan has previously looked at. But you can see plain as day that the bottom of the building becomes obscured and more of it is obscured the further away you go. So any surveyor that tries surveying the size of that building using basic trig and not accounting for any earth curvature is going to wind up coming to the conclusion that the physical size of the building is collapsing. And that brings us to this. This is a book that I purchased a while back called Surveying for Engineers. It is an in-depth training book for surveyors, and they actually have a section all about how you can measure heights using a theodolite with a technique called trigonometric heighting. Now, immediately you will notice that the diagram shows mean sea level isn't flat, but they also detail how to survey the height of the mountain. And according to Nathan, with this diagram, mean sea level would not curve like this. It would instead run flat, like this. So when you then level a theodolite to 0, it would then be running perfectly parallel above the flat version of mean sea level, versus on a globe, the mean sea level would be curving away. However, it literally states right here that if you try doing what Nathan suggested you do when surveying, your results would be wrong. So a surveying textbook, written by surveyors for the purpose of training surveyors, literally spells out that Nathan is wrong and doesn't know how survey measurements are taken. It even lays out here in the process for trigonometric heighting that Earth curvature and refraction have to be taken into account. And it's not just this book, by the way. You can look up any surveyor source material and it will tell you the same thing. There's a website called Learn CST, which you can sign up for free and look through some of the training material that surveyors use to prepare for the CST exam. All of that states that surveyors have to correct for Earth curvature. Now, what I found particularly amusing is that during a live stream I did after Nathan's response video, I actually showed on screen not only this book and that exact diagram that I've just shown stating that to survey heights of a mountain you have to include Earth curvature, but I also brought up a different surveying website that talked about the same process of trigonometric heighting, where it stated that unless the measurement points that you were going between were less than 50 meters apart, then Earth curvature and refraction had to be accounted for.
Oh, there you go. Provided the line of sight is kept relatively short, usually less than 50 meters, the problems of refraction and Earth curvature experienced with trigonometric heighting are eliminated, which means any distances over that, they're not.
And one person who was seemingly watching that stream was Wandek, somebody who is regularly a member on Nathan's panel. And the next day, Wandek mentioned to Nathan that I'd been talking about surveyors, but for some reason decided to tell Nathan that I'd said surveyors measure the Earth flat.
Hey Nathan, I was just listening to Dave McKeegan, and he's actually now just stated that yes, surveyors do measure Earth locally flat, but for larger projects they calculate for Earth's curvature, so it must be
timestamp.
Then again, when Nathan reviewed my video, he mentioned that he personally hadn't watched it beforehand, but that Wandek had, and was the one that told Nathan about it.
That's what it's called. Now, fortunately, Wandek's already watched this video and knows that it already says that.
And I know Wandek saw that video because he commented on it. So I can only presume he'd watched the whole thing, saw the last 5 minutes, which Nathan ended before reaching, where I not only highlighted that surveyors are taught to include Earth curvature into their surveys, but that modern surveying tools like total stations that are replacing theodolites don't give the surveyors the option. The manuals for total stations, created by the manufacturers, state that the total station automatically applies curvature corrections into all its measurements. So not only do surveyors not measure the Earth flat, but every survey ever done with a total station measures the Earth as a globe. Strange that Wandek neglected to mention that small fact to Nathan when Nathan's there repeatedly asserting that surveyors measure the Earth flat, having never actually done any surveying himself. But speaking of Wandek, this brings us away from surveying and onto celestial navigation, because they argue celestial navigation requires a flat Earth because they think you can't get elevation angles from a curved surface. Now, in the previous video that I did, I showed how you absolutely can get angles using curved surfaces. Many sports, for example, that used curved objects rely on being able to get angles between those curved objects. And I even showed how, if you're standing on a globe, you can look between the lights in the sky to the horizon, and it will give you two straight lines which you can then measure an angle between. I mean, the funniest part for me...
Sorry, Nathan. This is what they've got to do. They've got to lie now. I mean, he knows what an elevation angle is. I mean, we can all just look at what an elevation angle is and get a picture of one. It's quite easy to understand. Yeah, once you've looked at the citations and definitions and worked out what it is, it's not that difficult. But he's still denying what an elevation angle measurement is.
Now, here's an article explaining what elevation angles are. I mean, it's BBC Bite Size, which is usually geared more for children, but I'm sure it'll do. From a horizontal upwards is an angle of elevation, and from a horizontal down is an angle of depression. So if you stand near a building and you measure the angle from the base to the top, you've not actually measured an elevation angle because a portion of the building is below your horizontal. You've measured an angular size, which is a combination of an elevation angle plus a depression angle. If you were to subtract off the angle of depression, you would then be left with an elevation angle, which is essentially what gets done in celestial navigation with dip correction. Regardless of if the Earth is flat or a globe, the horizon will always be below the horizontal of your eye. No matter how much some flat earthers claim it always rises to eye level. If the Earth were flat and you could see infinitely far across its surface, then yes, at the infinite distance, it would rise to meet your eye level. But we can't see infinitely far across Earth. Obviously, for a globe, we can't see infinitely far because it's curved away, but flat earthers say that there's just a limit to our vision that stops us from seeing that far. But wherever that limit is cannot be at our eye level because it would mean that whatever part of Earth was beyond that limit to our vision would have continued to ramp up and would now be higher than eye level, which is not a flat Earth. That is an upwards curving Earth. And you can set up a level or a theodolite and you can see that the horizon drops below it and it drops more and more the higher up you go. So whatever shape you think the Earth is, the horizon is below your eye level. So when taking a sextant reading between a star and the horizon, you don't have an elevation angle because the bit between your horizontal and the horizon is a depression angle. So you have to subtract off the angle of depression, which is known as dip correction. It's why you don't need to apply dip correction to bubble sextants because they go from horizontal to begin with. And the dip values between globe and flat Earth would be different because the horizon would drop away from horizontal at different rates depending on the shape of the Earth, because a globe is obviously curving more and more over distance. So I showed a demonstration by Ion2, who took all of the dip correction data from a nautical almanac and projected them to show they form a curve that has the same curve rate as a globe with standard atmospheric refraction included. Now here's the full version of that by Ion2, so I can show you exactly how it works. At zero elevation, there is no dip correction. The line of sight is already running horizontal. As your height increases, so too does the angle of dip. Now, this dip angle is dropping more and more below horizontal. And in celestial navigation, you take an angle measurement between the star and the horizon, and then you subtract off the dip angle. So for any of these corrections, the blue line is essentially your line of sight to the horizon. And subtracting that angle amount will pull that line back up to horizontal, leaving you only the part of the angle that goes from horizontal up to the star, i.e. an elevation angle. And in the last video, I showed how you can get such an angle measurement between the line of sight to a star and the horizon on a globe. Then subtracting off that angle of depression will leave you an elevation angle from a local horizontal running through your eye level on a curved surface. And this works with a globe because the dip correction angles are exactly equal to what the angle of depression is for the observer's horizontal to their line of sight to the horizon if you're standing on a circle with a radius of the globe including standard atmospheric refraction, which has previously been shown by Planarwalk, who wrote some programming code to calculate what the angle of depression would be at any given altitude for somebody standing on a sphere with the radius of a globe plus an extra 1/6 for atmospheric refraction, and wouldn't you know it, the results match the dip angles from a nautical almanac. Now, I'm sure Nathan will still try and argue that elevation angles are a flat Earth measurement, even though I've already shown previously and he's agreed that you can get angles derived from curved surfaces, but he still tries to argue that latitudes are flat Earth elevation angles to Polaris.
What are these lines, Dave? Are these latitude lines? Oh, really, Dave? Where do we measure those? Are they the elevation angle measurements to Polaris? Oh, they are? Elevation angle measurements, like horizontal plane of Earth's surface and line up to Polaris, 2 straight lines meeting at a vertex.
Which is odd, because the very first time he made a video about me and I made a response to it, I posed this problem for his idea that latitudes are elevation angles to Polaris. So you're saying that the latitude lines all across Earth are people's measurement to Polaris, that whatever latitude they're at, that's where Polaris will be in the sky for them. So if you're at 90 degrees north latitude is the North Pole because Polaris is directly 90 degrees above you. Makes sense. And then 0 degrees is the equator. So if you're in Colombia or the Congo or Malaysia, Polaris appears at 0 degrees above a flat plane to all of them. Good to know. What do the latitude lines south of the equator mean? And one of his viewers even commented on one of the subsequent streams Nathan did that it was a very good point I'd raised. And yet to date I've never heard Nathan or any of his audience who appear in my comment sections be able to explain how they derive latitudes south of the equator when you can't see Polaris. Moreover, where is Polaris when you're south of the equator? Given that Polaris drops at a steady 1 degree per 69 miles, and at the equator it's at 0 degrees, so 700 miles south of the equator, surely it would be 10 degrees below the horizon. But then again, if Nathan's claim is correct and latitudes are elevation angles to Polaris, then that would mean that the elevation angle to Polaris at a particular location would always be an exact match for the latitude of that location. Yet we can get GPS data for our latitude to within a matter of centimeters. But if you go on Stellarium, which by the way is an incredibly accurate tool for knowing exactly where any celestial object is or will be in the sky, it's used by astronomers and astrophotographers the world over to plan where and when to view celestial objects, you can go and look at the exact elevation angle to Polaris, but it won't match your latitude. For example, if I look at London, latitude 51.49640 degrees, the angle to Polaris, when converted to the same decimal degrees, comes out at 51.17389, which is almost 1/3 of a degree away. And given that it's 69 miles per 1 degree, that means the actual location that has a latitude matching this particular elevation angle to Polaris is actually more than 22 miles away. And you'll also notice that the elevation angle to Polaris is constantly changing throughout the night. So if latitudes are elevation angles to Polaris, then firstly, the latitude values are all wrong, and B, the latitude for any single location on Earth would constantly be changing. But I think it's great that Nathan goes on about elevation angles to stars being proof that the Earth is flat, because for many months, leading up to and following our trip to Antarctica, I've had flat earthers constantly trying to argue that the lights in the sky don't tell you the shape of the ground. So for any of those flat earthers, you should go and take it up with Nathan, who is here arguing that measuring the lights in the sky is telling you the shape of the ground. But as I mentioned Antarctica, let's round off talking about that. Because Nathan really seemed to hit some narcissism when he reached the point in my video where I explained that it was I who'd suggested to MC Toon to call into Nathan's live stream whilst we were in Antarctica and explained why I'd done it. It'll work best if it's a Flat Earthers live stream because obviously we couldn't have CGI'd that in advance. I knew Flat Earthers would try and go down the rabbit hole of saying that we faked the trip in the north 6 months prior to TFE. So, me filming ourselves in Antarctica whilst we were interacting with a live stream that was taking place in December was a very easy way to then validate exactly when we were there. Having it be a Flat Earthers live stream would be even better because then they can't say we pre-planned the whole stream in advance. And here is Nathan's response, because then they can't say we pre-planned the whole stream.
I didn't say you pre-planned it though, did I? You see, Dave, this falls apart with me responding to you going, no, I didn't say you'd pre-planned it or that you weren't there. I said, okay, when he told me he was on the Antarctic snow. And then I said, you measuring Earth flat. And then I got told I was married to a mute button. So you were contacting us because you would assume people would deny that you were there? Because that's what your instinct told you flat earthers would do. You were proven wrong by me, though, weren't you? Because that's not what I did.
Now, in my opinion, that was pretty narcissistic, because I don't know if he thinks he's the only flat earther on the planet, but for some reason he automatically jumped to trying to make it all about him, suggesting that we'd called in because we thought he was going to deny we were there, which, if you go back and listen to what I said, is not what I said at all. I said I knew there would be some flat earthers that tried to make that sort of a claim, not specifically Nathan. The only reason Nathan came into the equation is because if we'd called into a Globers live stream, for example, flat earthers could have turned around and said that we'd planned it all in advance and the footage that came out afterwards was all CGI'd and prepared in advance. Making it a flat earther stream, we couldn't have predicted what their response was going to be or how the conversation was going to go. Whether Nathan accepted we were there or not is irrelevant. And just for clarity, here is only a selection of the comments that I've had on just the one time-lapse video that we published whilst we were still in Antarctica, of people saying that we didn't shoot this in Antarctica and that we shot it 6 months previously up in the north. But finally, Nathan constantly claims I measured the Earth flat in Antarctica when taking elevation angle measurements to the sun. Except I didn't. The only thing I did in Antarctica was capture the sunspots for 24 hours, showing that the sun's angular size did not change throughout that entire 24-hour period, which means the relative distance between us and the sun did not change by any measurable amount, that its angular size was also the same as I'd observed both here in the UK and in Punta Arenas, Chile, that I recorded the sunspots remaining in the same orientation throughout that 24-hour period, and I compared those sunspot locations to photos of the sun that people from all around the world were sending me at the same time, and being able to show that the orientation of the sunspots was changing depending on the observer's location on Earth, which is similar to the fact that we see the moon appear in different orientations depending on location. But Nathan's tried to address that in the past by claiming that it's the moon physically rolling across the sky.
But depending on your flat Earth elevation angle measurement to Polaris, it changes its orientation. No, I've observed it. What it does, depending on position, or time if you stay still, how long you wait for it to move through the sky, it rolls.
Well, he can't make that claim for the sun because I was watching the sunspots for the full 24 hours and the sun wasn't rolling. So how does the orientation change at different locations if the sun isn't physically changing orientation? Seems the only explanation is that the observers are changing orientation depending on location. But obviously that can't happen with a flat Earth. Probably explains why Nathan has conveniently completely ignored that whole part of the Antarctica trip. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please do consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.